folks. Welcome to Healing Outside the Box. My name is Jean Tiberio, and I'm a nutritionist and a wellness coach. Today is episode 291, and I'm going to talk about creatine and whether or not it actually does build muscle mass. And if it does, is it safe and is it worth the money? Now, the whole idea for this topic came up one day when I had a talk with someone about creatine and muscle mass. So I thought I would get into it a bit in this episode. But first I want to finish up with the benefits of berries, because in my opinion, it's a very important topic. Something so sweet and tasty is good for you? Anyway, in the last episode, I talked about the benefits of berries for cancer. But there's also evidence that berries are overall great anti-inflammatory foods. I want to bring your attention to a new type of grape called the moondrop grape, or sometimes referred to as the finger grape. It is deep purple or black in color and has a higher level of antioxidants, like the blueberries and blackberries. But as I tasted it, it reminded me of the sweetness of white grapes, so I liked it better than red grapes. As I mentioned in the last episode, this dark color means that the fruit has lots of polyphenols and are great to fight cancer and inflammation. I'll add the link to a short video in the show notes that also talks about dark berries in relationship to fighting osteoarthritis. They produce lower levels of inflammation markers after eating these dark berries. These inflammation markers, when elevated, relate to rapid progression of osteoarthritis. Eating blueberries, or in this case, purple grapes, significantly decreased the levels of free radicals in the bloodstream, specifically with the monocytes or immune system markers. Smoothies that contained about 1.5 cups of blueberries reduced repair time for weightlifters as well. So moondrop grapes are actually the best choice when it comes to eating grapes for nutrition. Secondly, in addition to the information from last episode on the anti-inflammatory properties in the plant-based diet foods, they also studied COVID-19 survival rates in plant-based diet populations versus regular American diet populations. While they were doing this, they looked back at how people ate during the 1918 flu epidemic, and in both cases, the same data resulted when comparing plant-based diets to regular diets. During the 1918 flu pandemic, the soldiers had better outcomes than the civilian populations, but the best overall outcomes were reported by a Seventh-day Adventist seminary where a plant-based diet was provided. The diet included grains, fruits, nuts, and vegetables, and no meat. Now, more recently, a study with about 600,000 participants showed that those people with a high consumption of fruits and vegetables had reduced the risk of severe COVID-19 symptoms by 41%. Yet another article in the British Medical Journal, and I'll put this in the show notes, showed that whole grains and legumes, meaning beans, lentils, etc., help produce healthy gut microbiota, both in the intestines and apparently in the lungs. These good bacteria, for example, are within the Bifidobacterium species and the Lactobacillus species, and they help produce short-chain fatty acids in the bloodstream. These short-chain fatty acids are associated with significantly reduced symptoms when people contact COVID-19. What I'm hinting at here is that using our own body's natural immune system, specifically learning how to do that, is going to be another tool in the future when fighting viruses. Early in 2023, the Journal of Integrative Medicine demonstrated that people eating a high-fiber, low-saturated fat diet had a lower risk of contacting COVID-19 and a lowered risk of severe symptoms, taking other factors into consideration. And it's not just the black and purple berries. Strawberries were studied in another trial with regard to inflammation. The group eating the strawberries showed lower values of CRP, a marker of inflammation. They also showed, in the same study, that strawberries given to diabetics will lower their A1Cs as well as lower the inflammatory marker. They did a study with a pint of strawberries per day for 12 weeks. Yes, I know a pint is a lot, but 12 weeks is a short amount of time. There was a significant reduction in pain levels and inflammation for people who already had osteoarthritis. So if you're interested, I encourage you all to listen to the previous 2 episodes if you haven't done so already. The third thing I forgot to mention when I was talking about cancer risk is that some contaminants still come from water. So if you're concerned about that, it may be a good idea to use filtered water even when cooking pasta or rice. The water contaminants we're talking about include small amounts of lead, mercury, pesticides, herbicides, and even small amounts of arsenic. As for contaminants in the air, the only thing that sticks out in my head as a controllable contaminant is lead levels at the firing range. During military basic training, instructors had a 95% likelihood of frequently being exposed to airborne lead levels far exceeding the acceptable range. Translation: children are small animals and therefore more likely to be harmed by airborne lead in their lungs. Therefore, children at gun firing ranges equals not a good thing. Now, back to today's topic. What is creatine supplementation, and is it worth the money? All right, let's start with the what is. The substance we call creatine is actually made from 2 amino acids, glycine and arginine. Those 2 amino acids are non-essential, meaning that our body makes the amino acids from protein in the food we eat. So these 2 amino acids combine in the kidneys to form a precursor of creatine. Then the creatine is produced in the liver. Although the liver makes what we need, people who are weight training often use creatine supplements. Just a side note, if you're thinking about taking supplements, the experts recommend between 2 to 3 grams, but no more. Just like about anything else, you can overdo it. If you take massive doses, you will just make your kidneys work harder, breaking it all down and sending it to your bladder. And as dietitians like to say, you'll end up with very expensive urine. And my guess is that if you're weight training, you get plenty of protein. If you're a vegan in weight training, that's a different story. You should seek the advice of a registered dietitian or someone trained to look into this for you. Now, creatine is involved in the storage and production of energy. In basic terms, here's how it works. The creatine that is produced in your liver can be stored in your muscles. Creatine is involved in a basic chemical reaction that is going on continuously in your muscles. The production of energy to make muscles work comes from something called ATP. It's adenosine triphosphate. Let's forget about the adenosine and focus on the triphosphate. A phosphate group is composed of 3 oxygens and 1 phosphorus. In the exchange of phosphate groups is what creates the energy. Creatine combines with ATP, the 3 phosphates, and produces phosphocreatine and ADP, diphosphate. Phosphocreatine is the storage form of creatine. In other words, when muscles are at rest and the energy is being stored, it is stored as phosphocreatine. In order to get that energy from the muscles for movement, this reaction goes in reverse. Phosphocreatine combines with ADP to form ATP, which is used in the muscles for energy. when creatine is done being used in the muscle and needs to be excreted, it goes to the kidney. Now, if creatine sounds vaguely familiar, you may have heard it as part of a lab test. If you have a blood panel done at the doctor's office, they will get a BUN and creatinine level. That's why the names creatine and creatinine are often confused. Creatine makes creatinine in the kidney and is flushed out in the urine. Normal levels of creatinine is usually 1.2 or lower. If it's high, there might be a problem with the kidney's ability to filter out the creatine by making creatinine. So both will be high in the case of kidney failure. Okay, so creatinine is a naturally occurring substance in our body that is involved in energy production. We can get some creatine from animal products because animals store creatine in their muscles as well. And just as I've mentioned, our bodies can also make creatine. Vegetarians can make as much creatine as their body needs. But the question that we in the nutrition biz often ask is, will taking creatine supplements help reverse our age-related muscle loss? Also, will taking creatine supplements improve athletic performance? Let's take the former question first. Does creatine storage levels drop as we get older? Well, it turns out that it doesn't seem to be the case. Creatine levels do not necessarily have to drop as we get older, as long as we stay active. Age-related muscle loss, called sarcopenia, is more a result of physical inactivity rather than some biochemical imbalance in our muscles. So we actually lose muscle mass as we age because we slow down, not because there was a problem manufacturing energy. There are loads of studies essentially proving that. They examined many elderly people. In one case, only took participants if they were at least 90 years old and put them on a walking and strength training regimen. It was successful. Some of them actually gained enough strength to lose the walker or wheelchair. All of them improved their strength and mobility. By a test of mobility, they used how easily it was for the person to go from a sitting to a standing position. So then, what happens if we give elderly people creatine supplements? Will we lower the incidence of falls resulting in fractures? For obvious reasons, there is much interest in this question. So when elderly people taking creatine just did some minor walking or light activity, there wasn't any change in their muscle mass. It turns out that the elderly would have to do some exercising at the same time. So they tested out the elderly participants with creatine and high-intensity exercise. In other words, they pushed participants to go a little bit beyond what they were comfortable doing. This had positive results. In multiple studies, where the elderly did weight training 3 times per week at a more intense level, there were significant increases in weight, muscle mass, and overall strength. I'm guessing the elderly people improved their appetites as well. Some of that weight might have been water weight, but they did show there was an improvement in the person's ability to safely go from sitting to standing. So this will only work when creatine supplements are taken with strength training exercises. They concluded that 2 to 3 grams would be the recommended dose to take when accompanied by strength training. Now to the second question. Will taking creatine supplements improve athletic performance? Well, certainly many young athletes assume that it will. Up to 70% of college athletes have used over-the-counter creatine supplements. They assume that if they take the supplements with intense strength training, they will build muscle mass. The difference is that college athletes who engage in intense running sports like football, soccer, cross-country running are generally eating plenty of food. In contrast, tiny little elderly people in the hospital are not big protein eaters. As a dietitian, I remember it being a struggle to get them to eat an English muffin for lunch. As I've said, creatine is made by our bodies and ingested in meat, poultry, fish, milk, and eggs. Intense physical training that young athletes are engaged in will improve muscle storage of creatine in our bodies naturally. That's part of a muscle's training process. So athletes already have plenty of stores of creatine, and perhaps don't necessarily need supplements because the training means that they already have enhanced storage capacity for creatine in their muscles. So if the athlete takes large doses of creatine supplements, it may force their kidneys to make creatinine at a high rate and dump it into the urine. So your kidneys are doing extra work when your body doesn't necessarily need the extra creatine. I'm sure there will be more studies looking into this. There are 2 possible exceptions to this general advice, and I want to remind everyone that they should be getting their medical advice from their own personal medical team. But the 2 exceptions are vegan athletes and perhaps wrestlers who starve themselves before an event to make it into the lower weight category. In both of those cases, I would recommend that the athlete seek the advice of a dietitian or physician who specializes in nutrition. I will give you the link to a good article about the necessity of creatine for athletes in the show notes. The bottom line here is that supplements are unregulated, and there is always a risk of problems for anyone taking large doses of an unregulated supplement. It could very well be safe, but there's no guarantee. In my opinion, the supplementation might be worth it in the elderly who are at risk for falls and could benefit from regular exercise. And that appears to be the case regardless of their age. So that's all I have for you today. Be well and stay tuned for another episode of Healing Outside the Box.